Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday replied to the motion of thanks on the President's address in the Lok Sabha, saying India will emerge as a strong player in a post-coronavirus world. The post-COVID world is turning out to be very different. In such times, remaining isolated from global trends will be counterproductive. We'll have to emerge as a strong player. That is why India is working towards building an Aatmanirbhar Bharat, the Prime Minister said. The discussion on the President's motion of thanks was taken up by the lower house of Parliament on Monday. The Prime Minister also spoke about farm reforms. We can't meet the challenges of agriculture sector in the 21st century with the thinking of 18th century. We'll have to change it. Nobody wants farmers to stay stuck in a cycle of poverty, the Prime Minister added. The Prime Minister said that the public sector is essential, but at the same time, the role of the private sector is also vital. Take any sector, telecom, pharma, we see the role of the private sector there. If India is able to serve humanity, it is also due to the role of the private sector. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Prime Minister's address in the Lok Sabha. Joining me on the program today are senior journalists Shekhar Iyer and KV Prasad, and Alok Verma, founder and editor-in-chief, news.com. Thank you to my panelists for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, let me start the program with you, Shekhar Iyer. Let's talk about, the farm reforms and something that the Prime Minister has spoken about time and again, something that has garnered a lot of attention as well as a result of the protests that we've seen. The government is serious as far as farm reforms are concerned, is to ensure that, the ease of farming is seen along with ease of so many other things as well.
Indeed, Frank, if you take today's reply of the Prime Minister in the Lok Sabha, along with what he had said in the Rajya Sabha, what is coming across very clear is the intention of the government, the objectives of the government in bringing about changes in several sectors, and particularly the agriculture sector, is with a purpose, is with a definite goal, and it has not happened, by some stroke of haste or some stroke of, things being done without consideration. In fact, both in the Rajya Sabha and in the Lok Sabha, we have heard the Prime Minister going in detail into the circumstances that has prevailed over 2 decades. The discussions and debate that has happened over 2 decades about the crisis in agriculture, about the condition of our small farmers, and the need for reforms. And reforms, as he pointed out, was not something that he thought of or his government was the first to do it. Rather, there has been a series of decisions, small or big or whatever possible, every government has done. But what has surprised at this moment, all of us, as the Prime Minister put it, is the very leaders, very parties which had talked about bringing these changes for the sake of the small farmer, and because of the urgency and imperative nature of the way things are moving in our economy, that things will have to be done. He even quoted from what the Prime Minister had said in the Rajya Sabha. Today he quoted from what Agriculture Minister Sharad Pawar had said. And he wanted to show, look, the whole objective is today, it is not about those big farmers or those who are already well established, who have developed a sufficient, interest in the continuation of the present system. Rather, this is about those people, almost more than 80% of our small farmers whose holdings are less than 2 acres, who produce very little, and who need an opportunity more than what is available to them today. That is why he kept on emphasizing that the old system has not been done away. The mandis continue to exist. Your procurement under MSP continues, and in fact, MSC prices have been steadily rising, and the amount of food grains being procured have also gone up. And also, the Prime Minister said, look, as he said in Rajya Sabha, and the point he emphasized here, this is not going to stop because the government needs to keep on procuring paddy and wheat for public distribution system. But at the same time, our farmers must also appreciate that they are, getting into a situation where they keep on producing more and more of things which are already in abundance in our godowns, of which demand is not rising. At the same time, there are other crops for which demand is there and new crop can be created. So he was constantly saying the need for these farmers to shift to horticulture, need to shift to oil seeds, and he cited the example of pulses. See, pulses, say about 10 years ago, and then after this government came in 2014, farmers have been encouraged to produce more and more pulses. And that has seen our dependency on the import of pulses has steadily come down. And today, the price of dal is not such a big issue because there was a time that our production inside the country was less. So basically, the Prime Minister was, making a case for need to appreciate these changes and not to resist them, because who is resisting them? Because he says a lot of those farmers who are out on the streets do not understand why these changes have come. In fact, he was particularly very distressed that a concerted attempt has been made to confuse issues, spread misconceptions, and it has been going on in a cycle. And those are the very people who are not willing to listen to facts, who are not willing to listen to a kind of timeline that has been involved in arriving at these decisions.
Right.
And also, the Prime Minister conceded a very important point, which he conceded in the Rajya Sabha and here. Look, no laws are written in stone, are cast in stone. A law is, at the same time, laws are not made with 100% concurrence. A law is made in the best interest to serve a large section of the people. There is a lot of scope for improvements. There are a lot of scope to point out lacunae. There are a lot of scope for improving the system. Because as and when you get more and more imports, I think by and large, the farmers who are out on the borders of Delhi would have heard the Prime Minister and would take a fresh look at their own stand, because they have taken themselves to a point from where they are unable to retrieve. By saying that only the repeal of law and nothing else, I think the Prime Minister has today rekindled the debate that should see more logical conclusion.
Absolutely. And since we are here, let's take this particular point forward. KV Prasad, as far as appreciating each other, there has to be a little bit of give and take. Clearly, the Prime Minister has made certain overtures. He's conceded that there has to be a little bit of give and take, and he is willing to go that extra mile as well. But looking at the bigger picture, reforms are going to stay. We need reforms, and he's very firm on that.
Yeah, that was a very unequivocal message that he sent across, and I think far more assertive than he was in the Rajya Sabha press reply which he gave a couple of days ago. He was so more emphatic here, and I think two things, if I would distinguish, is the fact that he mentioned that these laws does not mean taking away the MSP and the APMC systems, and telling them through the parliament, saying that you are welcome to choose what is available. So you can either stick to the APMC and market system and the MSP, or choose to go to the other way that the government has created an opportunity. And he gave many anecdotes how the rail Kisan or the Kisan rail is benefiting some small farmers or with lesser amount of produce, which would have otherwise uneconomical in terms of shifting them from one place to another at the cost at which they're getting. So he's kind of, and of course, the larger point was agriculture sector does need reforms. The economics of agriculture is becoming if it's becoming burdensome, you need to look at the changes. And the case for diversification from the basic food stocks that we've been practicing in this country is something that successive governments have been talking about. Here is a determined push towards that thing. I think these are the takeaways that I got from this reply.
All right. Alok Verma, let me bring you in now. Based on what the Prime Minister said in the Rajya Sabha and what he said in the Lok Sabha today, very clear window of opportunity has been given to those who are protesting as well. The government is willing to meet you halfway, but we also have to look at the bigger picture. We also have to look at the larger interest and look at all those people, and we need to take them all along is something that he reiterated as well, something that Shekhar Iyer was talking about in his opening remark too, and that too was a key underlying fact of his replies both in the Rajya Sabha and in the Lok Sabha, isn't it?
Of course. I think Prime Minister was very reassuring this time, and I think he addressed all the farmers, but I think he was basically trying to address the small and the marginal farmers. because most of the time he was talking about how these land holdings are becoming smaller, how it is becoming almost, the cultivation is becoming not economically viable. And unless the farmers are being handheld, there'll be no growth of, the agriculture or the farming community. And I think he deliberately stayed away from not really addressing too many rumors which are in the way, and also he was very clear in terms of the intent and the firmness of the government. Firmness of the government is that no government is not willing to, is willing to listen to you, but is not willing to concede the ground on the basis of just because you're doing the agitation. He also welcomed, they said that agitation in any democracy is welcome, but one has to really see which way the agitation is being led, which direction the agitation is being led. And I think he's given a very, flexible rope to everyone, that the government is still willing to speak, government is willing to still listen to you. If you still have some doubts, you are most welcome to come, and we are willing to, address those issues. So I believe overall his speech was more or less clearly for the farming community, especially the smaller farmers. And definitely, as others said, he also quoted that how the other leaders of the previous government, the Prime Minister, earlier Congress government, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, or how Mr. Sharad Pawar as an agriculture minister, they were all agreeing to what is being implemented. And I think what he said very importantly, he said his government believed in not maintaining the status quo. You have to go forward. You cannot continue to just live in the status quo and just let whole agriculture go disarray, and you should not look at the agriculture sector, which is a very important sector for the country and for the well-being of the farmers. So I believe that overall, I think Prime Minister was very reassuring in the House today.
Absolutely. Taking the discussion forward now, Shekhar Iyer, let me talk about another underlying aspect that the Prime Minister has raised time and again, that of India's willpower during these very difficult times, about how India has shown the way for the rest of the world as well, be it, in the initial days of hydroxychloroquine, and then remdesivir, and now even the vaccine development and vaccine distribution as well. So how India has really led this path as well, and we, everyone's calling us the pharmacy of the world. The willpower of the people of India is another aspect through COVID that he raised, and he's been raising for a while now.
Indeed, Frank. In fact, he started his address pointing out how COVID has ravaged economies across the world, and particularly the conditions of the people. Countries which have sufficient, funds to take care of their population could not do much, whereas a resource crunch country like India did much better. And he particularly pointed out, because the government had gone for the digital system, because the government had created Jan Dhan Yojana, bank accounts, because the government had put in place a direct benefit transfer, what we saw was during this period, almost he gave a figure of 2 lakh crores of money could be sent directly to those people, as some kind of cash on hand to take care of them. And besides that, he mentioned about 75 crore or more people, that is about 750 million people got ration, which was through the public distribution system, free of cost. Now, this is again a big achievement. And he also mentioned that the fact that our doctors, our health workers, our frontline workers, where they combated. And, along with what was possible and what was made possible during the pandemic and the way we combated it, and finally leading to, one of the massive vaccination programs of the world, which has been started and which is seeing that more and more, frontline workers as well as health professionals are being covered. He mentioned one more point. I think that the point has some reference and to the criticism about the entry of private sector in agriculture, the fear of the private sector. He said, look, even on an issue like, fighting the pandemic, we saw the efforts of the government were more than supplemented and complemented by the role of the private individuals and private concerns. Similarly, he said, look, today agriculture needs a lot of infusion of capital. a capital which the center does not have enough because it has to take cater to several other issues and other areas which the state governments do not have. Therefore, let us not condemn our private sector. And who are these private sector? He did not have in mind those big corporations whose family names are often bandied about by the opposition. Rather, he said, look, when you are attacking the private sector, you are attacking our aspirational youth, who many of whom have launched startups, many of whom are not those giant corporate groups. They are, and because if you keep on condemning the private sector, you are creating a situation where you are going to kill enthusiasm for any initiative. That should not be the case. And he cited the example of how, say, for instance, the mobile technology, the mobile availability of mobile services, because of more private players. Today, you find the mobile rates have come down. You can see how mobile has become such an important instrument of ease of living and doing business. That is because of the role of private sector. Similarly, in the development of vaccination, here you are seeing that the vaccines that are currently being distributed in the country are the result of, one is the Serum Institute, which is again a private initiative working with Oxford, and you have the other one, which is the Bharat Biotech, which is working with ICMR. So therefore, let us not, in this moment of heat, condemn completely the role of private sector, because after all, today our agriculture sector needs infusion of capital in terms of course, the government is doing its part by having more than 100 Kisan rail, is also creating warehouses, is also trying to see how the farmers can be approached through various ways of giving them credits. But at the same time, you need the private sector because without that, you cannot unleash the potential of our farming community. So
Absolutely.
therefore, I think an important message was, just as we fought COVID by involving all sections, both the role of public sector undertakings as well as private initiative. Similarly, a great success awaits us when it
Right.
comes to bringing about those very important changes that are needed in the agriculture sector.
Absolutely. Let me take this particular point that you're making forward with KV Prasad now. In the past, we've seen governments and political parties shying away from openly, speaking up or supporting the private sector. It comes as a pleasant change, doesn't it? Because we need everyone to be on the same page, everyone to work, in coordination with each other, especially during these challenging times.
Yeah, I think, Frank, that takes me back to the early 1991 when the country unleashed the first set of economic reforms. And one of the famous criticism was the LPG economy, which they said liberalization, privatization, globalization. This was the criticism that was leveled at that point of time. But of course, we have seen much water flow down the rivers of various parts of the country. And we are out, and I think around this time when Mr. Vajpayee's government came, we talked about the need for second generation of reforms. So this is something which is in works. But every time, whenever there's an issue, a question of privatization, or there is a lot of resistance. And this is something not new. The resistance has been there, as I said, right since 1991. When the reforms process was started, we had one of the biggest rallies in the Boat Club of India by many unions. But it's a question of acceptance, the question of because how you change with times and how that change affects people and how they find benefit out of it. That's more important. And once the people find benefit out of these things, and once the issues of, once we had the Monopoly Restricted Trade Practice Commission, which has been since shifted to Competition Commission, a far more level playing field available for everybody who has, and a fair price for the product, and the consumers also benefiting. So this is where the thing is. This debate is something which is going on, will remain, but as you said, for the Prime Minister who mentioned this very categorically upfront, I think one of the things which he has said, and which was central to what was being practiced even earlier, the government cannot be in the business of business. This was an argument which was given very early in the reform phase, that you cannot be making bread, the government cannot be flying planes, the government cannot be running hotels, and something to that was alluded to by the Prime Minister in a different form, when he said you cannot expect one set of people continuing to doing the same set of things. You need innovation to take the country forward as challenges come across the globe.
Absolutely. So let me also bring in Alok Verma into the picture now and talk about another aspect. This aspect where the Prime Minister said that we cannot be isolated from global trends. We need to be productive and we need to emerge as a strong player. Emerging as a strong player will also send out a loud and clear message to the rest of the world, isn't it?
Of course. So the Prime Minister was very clear when he was talking post-pandemic global order, emergence of global order. Of course, Prime Minister was saying that he or one doesn't know which way the world would emerge and which way, the new changes would happen. But he mentioned that those changes are going to happen. They're inevitable. But when those changes are happening, the country, India, should be right there. It should not be missing the opportunity. And of course, when we are seeing how the economy is getting back, the world has really coming out of the great, pandemic problem. So obviously, things are going to emerge very differently. And during the pandemic, Government of India has really played a very, very significant role by providing a lot of healthcare, supplying healthcare, masks, ventilators, now vaccine. I think the world is looking at India, that how India responded to this particular situation, not just handling pandemic within the country, but also reaching out to neighboring countries and countries outside neighborhood and providing them the required medical help. So probably taking cue from there, he particularly sees that there will be a new global economic order where India can play a very significant and dominant role, for which he is saying India must build itself so that it can actually be a global player rather than be sitting on the sidelines as in the past.
Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, Shekhar Iyer. In this charged atmosphere, do you believe that the Prime Minister's address both in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha will help in building bridges and lowering the temperature a little bit?
And I think the government has shown, a lot of flexibility in terms of its approach to this current issue by making it very clear that there is no ill intent, and the only objective is to see that somehow our small farmers get better opportunities to improve their economic welfare. And the second thing he has, I think, answered rather very emphatically, the fact that the governments should not be waiting for a crisis to fall on their hand to, attempt solutions. The governments will have to be proactive, because one thing that came out during the debate was, why did you bring these laws now? Farmers did not ask for it. At least the Punjab farmers were very comfortable with the way things have been going on there. Why do you have to bring this? To which the Prime Minister answered, look, some of the big changes that have come, whether it was, say, the Dowry Act, which banned taking of dowry, that did not come because there was some big campaign or agitation for a Dowry Act. Because it was felt that taking and receiving dowry was a social evil. The law was brought. Similarly, he mentioned about bringing in the eligible age for a man and a woman to get married. Now, there was no demand that the age should be increased. There was no public agitation, but it was felt by a lot of our economic planners, by a lot of our the political leadership, that in order to see, put some check on our population explosion, and also to take care of the health of the mother and child, you need to increase the age. And similarly, he cited other examples. So therefore, all, for instance, even triple talaq, there was no mass movement, but there were stories of several plight of women belonging to a particular community facing this kind of harassment. Right. So the law had to come. So similarly, a problem like that the farmers have been facing, there are many problems. Some small farmers will not even know how to articulate it. So it is the job of the government of the day to address them and to come with solution. And that is why this government has done. I think after what the Prime Minister said in both the houses, I would expect, the farmer leaders to again do some kind of, discussion among themselves. And they should come out of that stalemate where they are put in themselves. Because after all, a legislation passed by Parliament cannot be rolled just because a few people are sitting on the streets outside Delhi. Now, imagine if similar agitation were to happen over, say, a case of income tax, You expect the government to roll back Income Tax Act? And what is the sanctity of a legislation being passed in Parliament?
Sure.
I think where necessary, he has shown his willingness to be accommodative, but at the same time also he has made it very clear what has been done with the right intention, with the purpose of right consequences, cannot be just called off because some people want to do politics on this issue.
Right. KV Prasad.
Well, I think if I look at the current parliament session, we've had some kind of a small window where the opposition did show its different strategy. I think the fact that they allowed the president's motion of debate to come back to Lok Sabha after having stalled it shows that there was some element. Of course, they had a walkout today, but that was well within their parliamentary right to stage their protest. But there is a window of opportunity for both the opposition and the government to sit down together. And of course, the larger community of farmers who are out on the outstreets of Delhi.
Alok Verma, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yes, absolutely. I think Prime Minister first, using this today's motion of thanks, reached out to the opposition also, that his government is willing to engage with the opposition on seeing if there are certain, amendments or some changes or some, useful suggestions are to be, made, then the government is willing to do. He's made a commitment that his government is going to be a responsive government, not going to wait for some people to really come and ask for it. It will remain a responsive government. And I think it has sent a very strong message in one of the, an address what he made about the IS officers. He said, this Babus cannot run this government. Probably there was a very strong message today, and I hope to see that what he said about, the Babudom. I hope to see some, effective measures being taken in this government so that it gets out of the clutches of the Babudom. So I think these are the key takeaways from my side.
All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.